welcome back. I'm Jacqueline Boyd of the Care Plan, and I'm so glad that you've chosen to join us today. You're probably watching this video because of the title, I would guess, because you're dreading the conversation with your mom, dad, spouse, or friend about taking the keys away. Doesn't that sound terrible? For people who are drivers and maybe have been for decades or most of their lives, the idea of taking their keys away is incredibly painful. Not to mention, it can make a person feel infantilized, less than, and out of control. Take a moment to just think about how you would feel if someone in your life who was 2 decades younger than you came to you in this moment and said, "You're not a safe driver and you need to get off the road and we're taking your keys away." Just imagine how that feels. It doesn't feel good, and it doesn't matter how old you are. It doesn't matter if you've had accidents or if you're losing your vision or if you're shaky. It doesn't matter. It's hard for people to see that for themselves. And so thinking about it from a kind perspective and how can we be gentle and take time with our loved ones on this particular issue is what we're talking about today. This is just one of those issues that people are the most stubborn about, most resistant to, and so here are some tips on how to address that to keep the person feeling supported rather than targeted or like they're being treated unfairly. Our first tip is to discuss it over time. This is not one of those conversations that needs to happen in an urgent way. Ideally, we are thinking about this years ahead of time. Give your loved one the chance to tell you how they feel about what it means to stop driving. What's important to them about being a driver? Can they recognize that at some point in the future, it's likely that they won't be able to do that anymore? Do they have friends that have stopped driving or gotten rid of their cars? How did it affect them? How does your loved one feel about that? Have these conversations, like I said, far in advance. It helps to minimize the shock of having the conversation. Our second tip is if during the course of that initial conversation or conversations, your loved one does agree and says, "Yes, we had to take the keys away from mom or dad and that was really hard, but it needed to happen." That's an opportunity for you to say, "Okay, so what does that look like for us? What does that look like if you're feeling no longer safe on the road, or if somebody thinks that you should have your keys taken away? What are the markers for us? What does it look like for our relationship?" And talk about the specifics. Is it about memory change? Is it if accidents start to occur? Is it if they're feeling a little shaky or scared when they're on the road? Support the person in thinking through the when without creating the immediacy of it has to happen now, if that makes sense. Our third is minimize emotion. You should try to be a neutral third party in these conversations, absorbing their input, but not putting your own judgment or your own timeline on it. It's important to let people process the idea, again, before you push urgency. If your loved one starts to talk about, "Well, why are you asking me this?" If they start to get suspicious, staying in that place of minimal emotion will help you get through the conversation and stay focused on the fact that this is the person's choice. That you care about them, you want to be forward thinking, you want to be sure that you're supportive of them throughout the course of their lives. So knowing that this is more than likely going to happen at some point, what decisions can they make ahead of time? Keep it laser focused on the issue, not on your emotions or feelings about when that time comes. So the suggestions I've offered so far are if you're able to talk with your loved one well in advance, if they're in a reasonable place around this issue and able to talk through and think through it from a place of practicality. That is not the situation for a lot of our families. Many people aren't able to have a reasonable or casual conversation with their loved one on this issue. If it is more urgent, it's time to build support before you just go headlong into this conversation. Talk with the other decision makers, talk with your siblings, with the friends or family who are close to this loved one. Talk to the loved one themselves to gather ideas about how to approach the issue so that you can present a calm, united front. Also know that you have the option of having a third person involved or a third party, like a doctor, an eye doctor, the DMV, It depends on your community and what's available to you, and if your loved one is seeing any of those types of providers. But that's a nice way to ease the stress off of your relationship with your loved one and have them hear that bad news from someone else. So again, if your loved one is getting into accidents, if you are immediately concerned, pull in a third party and try to get someone in a position of authority to have those conversations and to really strongly encourage your loved one to think about stepping down from driving. And then finally, make sure that there's an immediate solution for the transportation issue. Transportation and driving for many people is about freedom. It's about choice. It's about getting to where you want to go on your schedule. And so the idea of taking the keys away is taking the car away. It's taking away that freedom. And so making sure that there's a transportation source available immediately is going to make that conversation a lot more successful. In your area, you might have ADA paratransit services that you can look into, or a service like Uber or Lyft that is incredibly useful for seniors all over the country who wouldn't have transportation otherwise. So again, make sure you have the solution, not just the problem in hand when you have this conversation. Like I said before, this is a tough talk to have with your loved one. And typically, if it's time for this talk, it's probably time to talk about long-term care in general. There's likely other issues that are creeping up that are of concern to you, your loved one, or other people in your lives. The care plan is here to discuss those concerns, to offer you advice and solutions, and we'd love to hear from you. So also, if you enjoyed this video or if you have feedback, please take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments, and especially if you have tips on what's worked for your family. We'd love to hear that as well. Thank you so much again for joining us. Good luck having the conversation, and take good care.